Are you looking for the mini console with the mouse blast processing? Do you long for the days of playing FMV games on your CD-based console? Well, look no further, friends, because the SEGA Genesis Mini 2 has arrived. Hi, I'm Ryan Turford from Carpool Gaming, and this is the SEGA Genesis Mini 2 in review. Now, it's been a long time since we've had a mini console in our hands. You know, it's been a long time since the SEGA Genesis Mini 1, I think, was the last one that I can even remember getting. I know there's been a few that have come out since then. But I'm actually so happy that Sega went back and made another one of these. First of all, just look at the form factor of this thing. It's so tiny and it's so cute. Especially because you can totally play with all the little compartments, and it's definitely made to scale and made to look exactly like, you know, the Sega Genesis console that I'm the most nostalgic for, which is the Sega Genesis Model 2. I think a lot of people would kind of fall into the same candidates as well. Even though we had a Genesis Model 1 in our household, we did actually quickly upgrade it to the Model 2 when it became available. So I do really enjoy this console a lot. I love the form factor. But let's talk about the mini console itself, what you get with it and whatnot. Now, quick heads up, you've probably noticed already from looking at my unit here, I am working with the Japanese model, but after talking to some of my friends who got the North American model, I can assure you that everything I'm going to say here pretty much applies to the North American model. The only difference is some of the games that are included in this one, because the Japanese version, are different than the North American version. But otherwise, the interface, the way the games play, all that is exactly the same. So first up, with this mini console, you get over 50 games included with the console, spanning both the Genesis and the Sega CD. And I honestly think it's a great lineup. First of all, I think the North American lineup is really good if you are looking for, side-scrolling action games, things like, the two Shinobi games, Revenge of Shinobi, as well as Shadow Dancer. You also get stuff like Desert Strike, this cool like isometric helicopter game. You also get, stuff like Vector Man 2 and Shining Force 2, and a lot of really good games. You also get Sonic 3D Blast if you really want that. But I actually really like, and I'm actually kind of happy with the Japanese model. I actually like the library on the Japanese model a lot. There are a lot of weird games on the Japanese model that we'll talk about a little bit that, I never played before, but I certainly got a chance to play here. But one of the cool things about this console, and I love that Sega, put this much detail into this, is that they decided to give you different variations of the console depending on what region you want to select. So for example, again, on this Japanese console, it normally comes in Japanese as the base language, and it gives you the look of the Mega Drive 2 to match kind of the box that came out in Japan with all the Japanese box art for all the games, and it plays all the games in Japanese if you want to play it that way. But you can actually change the menu to English, and when you do that, it gives you the Sega Genesis menu instead, which again is the same menu that comes, by default on the North American unit. And then gives you access to all the games in English that are available on the console in English. Again, in the Japanese version, not all the games got a North American release. For example, we've got the Working Designs games that unfortunately are not the English versions. They only have the Japanese version. So unfortunately, Lunar 2, Popful Mail, like all those games would have been awesome to play. But unfortunately, even though they did get a North American release outside of Japan when the console launched, I mean, I actually do have, boxed copies of Lunar and Lunar 2 on my shelf here. The problem is, the rights to those are kind of stuck in development hell with Working Design. So unfortunately, they weren't able to get them for this console. So unfortunately, we don't have the North American versions of those games available to us, which is why they don't appear on the North American console. They are on the Japanese console only. Likewise, you've also got games like Shin Megami Tensei on here, as well as some trivia games and stuff that, again, just didn't get North American translations, and they didn't do new translations for this collection or anything like that, which I kind of wish they did. In all honesty, especially a game like Shin Megami Tensei, I would have loved if they went back and did that, especially because we're going to get into it a little bit, but they brought out unreleased games as well as, tweaked certain games that are in this collection. And I would have loved to see, some of the games get localizations for the first time in this collection. I think that would have been really sweet. So the collection itself, pretty good collection, as I mentioned, both across the Sega CD and the Sega Genesis side. You've got, my highlights anyways from this collection. Sonic CD, one of the best Sonic games of all time. It's actually my personal favorite Sonic game of all time. You've got Shining Force CD, one of the best strategy role-playing games of all time in this collection. Also super expensive if you want to buy the actual CD for Sega CD. It's really, really, really solid, very expensive. You've also got Shining in the Darkness, a really good first-person role-playing game. And if role-playing games aren't your thing, you've got Outrun, like a really fantastic racing game that I really enjoy. Ranger X is a really solid action side-scrolling game. You've got all kinds of amazing games in this collection, and I actually think like this collection, even though I think it's missing a lot of the heavy hitters that were on the previous mini console, because I think Sega just didn't want to duplicate on any of the games that were already included in the first console. I think what you get here is a pretty solid collection of Genesis games, and honestly, there was also a lot of stuff in this collection as well that I didn't even know was a thing, or I kind of learned about for the first time as well. And a lot of that obviously was on the Japanese side with the Japanese games. Definitely on the North American unit, the game selection there I'm much more familiar with. But getting to play some games for the first time is just super interesting. I mean, I didn't know that Game Freak did a Japanese only SEGA Genesis game that was like a side-scrolling action platformer. But that's in this collection. If you have the Japanese, it didn't actually make it to the North American Genesis Mini 2 if you got that model. But it was super fun to play too, and you can totally play it, not understanding the dialogue that's there, because there is some talking between the characters. But for the most part, I found I had a great time playing that game, despite the fact that I couldn't read the Japanese. And what little was there, I could in theory just whip up my phone, use Google Translate, and have it do its best to translate the text for it. Honestly, I actually thought that was like a good solution for some of the stuff. I actually tried that out on Lunar, for example, a game that I know super well, because I know a lot of the dialogue kind of by heart at this point, because I played that game so many times, and the translation using Google Translate was actually pretty close to what I know from the North American version. Obviously, though, there are some games I wish we would have gotten in here besides, the North American Working Designs games. For example, Snatcher is an obvious one from Konami. I mean, that game has been stupidly expensive for a long time, just because it had like a rare print run, but also because it's an amazing game from Hideo Kojima, and it's one that just most people just haven't played. And that's like such an obvious oversight in this collection. Or even, stuff like Haunting, starring Poltergeist, I would have loved to see here. Zombies Ate My Neighbors from Lucasfilm, especially because that did just get a re-release. I would have loved to see them put this in collection, because we've actually seen that before from other companies. Them kind of do like a re-release, and then it appearing in the Genesis Mini. We saw that with the original Genesis Mini, with the Konami collections came out around the same time as the Genesis Mini did, but we had Castlevania Bloodlines and Contra Hardcore in there, both of which had received, newer collections for those games. So I would have loved to see, even though that the excuse would be, oh, well, they just want you to buy the Zombies Ate My Neighbor collection. There's precedent for this before. I would have loved to see something like that in there. Also, I'm going to throw it out there. I would have loved to see more FMV games from the Sega CD. I mean, in the North American version, you got Sewer Shark and then Night Trap. Are the two most famous ones. And then the Japanese model, it only has Night Trap. Although, obviously almost all of the Sega CD games involve FMV cutscenes of some kind. But I would have loved to see more of that stuff. Like I would have loved to see the Penn and Teller game would have been awesome, especially because that didn't get released. This would have been a great way to put this out there, or something like Tomcat Alley, or Ground Zero Texas, like stuff like that would have been like really cool. Again, those games are like super cheesy, but they're also kind of fun to play, honestly. So I think if anything, they might have been actually more playable than something like Night Trap is in this collection, because if for anyone who's never played Night Trap before, it's just one of those things where the newest Night Trap collection is just so much more playable, because you can see all the surveillance camera feeds at once, so it's a lot easier to get through the game. Plus, I love those cinematics in HD, versus what we have here. The Sega CD version is actually just really hard to play, and you really just have to have memorized everything in order to be able to beat that game. Let's also talk about some of the customization options you have in here. So first of all, you can, by default, the games play at 4:3 which is obviously the way you should play them, but you have a 16:9 option if you want to stretch the games out. They're not natively built for 16:9, but you can certainly play them that way if you choose to do so. All of the games support save states as well, so you can definitely save however often you want to, or definitely spam save states if you want to do that. One of the nice things too about the included controller here is the mode button on the top of it that I'm clicking here, that actually opens the menu for the Genesis Mini 2, and you can actually then use the saves right from there. So there's actually an included button on this controller specifically used for that. Not only that, but you've also got different borders, and if you don't like just black borders, you also have the ability to select between the sound for the games sounding like a Genesis Mini, the Genesis Model 1 or the Model 2, because they did have like a slightly different sound to the sound cards of the two consoles. So you do have that option in there if you choose to do so. Again, by default, it's set to the Genesis Model 2, and I actually think that that's probably the best way to play it. But if you prefer the Model 1 sound, you can definitely do that as well. And there's a lot of cool little features and stuff like that I love with this console, and little tweaks that they went along the way. Again, you could definitely feel like the love from Sega. Like someone from Sega obviously really cares about this stuff and cares about the Genesis, and really wanted to put together like a great overall package. Like this is the overall package that you get here, not just from the games are concerned, but the interface itself to the way the games play, because they play with very little latency. Like I really didn't notice much latency going between this and like a analog Mega SG. There might be like a millisecond or two, but beyond that, it's nothing, that's going to distract from the way these play. And the games just visually look good as well, on top of all that. So I really love all the care and attention that went into this package. On top of that, let's talk about this controller as well, because, I mentioned this in the unboxing video, and I definitely felt it while playing it. This controller is a little bit tinier than the original, 6-button controller. I've got the retrobit one here, which is also a little bit smaller than the normal one, but it's like, it's only by like less than an inch, whereas this one, the one that's included, is definitely much smaller. So for someone like me who's got like really long like piano fingers, it actually made like kind of cramped up my hands a little bit for long playing times using this controller. So I definitely kind of switched back pretty quickly to the retrobit USB controller. And again, if you've got a USB Genesis controller of any kind, whether it's 3 buttons or 6 buttons, you can totally use it with this console. Not a problem. I'm just glad that they included a 6-button controller with the console, especially because we do have, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo in here, as well as some of the other Japanese games take advantage of it, like the sumo wrestling game or Ranger X actually takes good advantage of the 6-button controller. So I'm glad that they included it here, but if you've got bigger hands, you're going to want to get your hands on one of these controllers, or just another USB Genesis controller of some kind, one that's, more comfortable with your hands. So overall, what do I think about the Genesis Mini 2? I mean, if I'm being completely honest here, I think that this is probably the best mini console I've ever played in my entire life. I love this console so much. Again, it's given me, new introductions to weird and wacky Japanese games. I also love, the way that the North American games play on here. I just like the game selection a lot. I love the interface. Just everything about this console was worth every dollar I spent on this. This is going to be a great addition to my library. I'm probably going to definitely be pulling this out every once in a while to play some of these games. Of course, I also have, a Mega SG, and I do play a lot of games there as well, because I do like to play a lot of Genesis games and Sega CD games. But having if I want to play a game that's included on this collection, I'm going to go back and just pull this out rather than, playing it on my Mega SG, especially something like Shining Force CD, which I actually, again, have the CD for on my shelf. But obviously with the price of that game, I don't want to always pull it off my shelf to play it, especially causing, wear and tear to the CD and stuff like that. So if I'm going to ever play Shining Force CD again, it's probably going to be on this console instead of, pulling out my CD and playing it that way. Not only that too, it just takes up so much less space than the Genesis with, the Sega CD attachment and stuff like that. So again, any of the Sega CD games that are in this collection, I'm just going to opt to play them this way because it's the most convenient way to play those games. And again, they run really well here. They sound great. They play great. I just don't have anything bad to say about this console other than I just wish we had more. I just wish we had more stuff in it. And I know that's a lot to ask. And I hopefully, this means, because we've got another model of the Genesis out there. We've got the Genesis Model 3. Like, I would love to see, Sega go back and do another one of these, even if they wanted to copy like the CDX model or like do one with like 32X games and stuff. Like, I think this idea is great. And I think Sega really likes these mini consoles. So whether or not they move on to the Dreamcast or do Saturn or they do another Sega one, I just really, really like this console. And I'm glad Sega just put so much effort into this one. And honestly, I am kind of sad that you're not really able to pick these up anymore, because I know, if you didn't pre-order one, the link is just down and you're not able to get these anymore. So, which is too bad, because I know they made them in like a super limited supply. So this is something I wish more people would have been able to get their hands on. It's probably not worth, the insane asking price I'm already seeing on eBay for this product. So it's just one of those things where if you were able to snatch one up, awesome. And unfortunately, if you weren't able to, I'm sorry to report that this is actually a really awesome product. Anyways, that's going to do it for my review of the Sega Genesis Mini 2. But what do you think about this mini console? Let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know what Sega does that Nintendo don't. I would love to hear from you. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, right here at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, and on podcast services around the globe. I'm Ryan Turford. This has been our review of the Sega Genesis Mini 2, and I'm out.
What?